In this video, we will discuss the separate sovereigns exception to the Double Jeopardy Clause. The Double Jeopardy Clause of the Fifth Amendment to the United States Constitution prohibits the government from prosecuting a person twice for the same crime. So let's say a defendant goes on trial in federal court and he's found not guilty. The government can't turn around and put him on trial again for the same crime, this time hoping to convict him. The Double Jeopardy Clause ensures that the government can only try the defendant once. So in our example before, we would say that the second trial in federal court is prohibited. It is unconstitutional under the Double Jeopardy Clause of the Fifth Amendment. But remember that in the United States, there are both federal and state laws and federal and state courts. Now let's say David decides to rob a bank, and in doing so, that single action of robbing the bank violates both state law and also federal law. So it's possible that David could be put on trial in state court and found guilty of robbing the bank. But we have to also consider the possibility that he could be put on trial in federal court because robbing the bank also violated federal law. So our question is, would this be prohibited by the Double Jeopardy Clause of the Fifth Amendment? That is it double jeopardy if a state and federal government successively prosecute a person for the same underlying activity? In decisions dating back over 100 years, the Supreme Court has said, no, it does not violate the Double Jeopardy Clause because the state and federal governments are separate sovereigns. By separate sovereigns, we mean both the federal and state governments have the power to make law. So, successive prosecution by a state government and then a federal government does not violate double jeopardy because it's two separate crimes against two separate sovereigns, even though there was just one activity. But in a recent case, a defendant is challenging the separate sovereigns exception. The defendant was arrested for illegally possessing a pistol under Alabama state law because he's a felon. And, in fact, as a felon possessing a pistol, this defendant was also found guilty of violating federal law. The Supreme Court has agreed to hear the defendant's challenge that the successive prosecution by state and federal governments violated his constitutional rights by putting him in double jeopardy. To summarize, the Double Jeopardy Clause prohibits the government from trying someone twice for the same crime. The Supreme Court has held that there is a separate sovereigns exception which allows successive prosecution by state and federal governments. The Supreme Court has agreed to hear a case in 2018 in which it will decide whether to overrule its prior decisions and whether the separate sovereigns exception should still apply to the Double Jeopardy Clause.